Hello everyone. So Happy New Year, I suppose, to some degree or other. Although obviously we're a few days in now. First video of the year was for some reason feeling a little bit intimidating for me. So perhaps it's just that I took like a week or so off, and automatically within less than a week I find the camera gets re-intimidating again. So this is going to be a slightly less formal video than I had originally thought I would start off with. But you know, it's fun, it's chatty, it seems appropriate. So I'm going to do something new today and very informal, and that is an unboxing of a tarot deck that I recently ordered that has arrived in the post literally 20 minutes ago. And as I do that, I'll just chat about whatever happens to kind of come to mind, especially insofar as it's channel relevant and possibly pertaining to some of the concepts and things that I'm kind of interested in exploring at the moment. So yeah, without further ado, I have here, this just came in the post, I've removed my address, and I'm pretty sure that this is the most recent tarot deck that I ordered, and I have scissors. I remembered scissors. In fairness, I'm sitting at my desk where I do a lot of my art projects, and my scissors are always like right there. So I don't know if that counts as being like, as having like figured out the newbie thing. Anyway, I'm just gonna slice right into this bag. So new to me is the box is additionally wrapped in cardboard. I kind of like that. That's a good thing, especially for Ireland, where it is totally normal for your post to arrive completely soaked. Books are not safe, you know, according to how most people package their stuff. If you're ever shipping to Ireland, make sure it is wrapped in something entirely waterproof. That can be compostable and recyclable, but waterproof it must necessarily be, because the number of things, including tarot decks, that I've had that have arrived where the box is, you know, things are at risk of being very severely damaged from the wet, and you know, I've had official documents arrive in the post soaked. It's not cool. So yeah. Anyway, the box, the tarot deck that I have ordered is the Crystal Tarot. So here it is, wrapped in the plastic. Just a note on this before I kind of get into the plastic wrap of it is that it's hard to kind of qualify and or quantify what draws me to a specific deck. Obviously, we know that working with a deck is a completely different phenomenon, or often can prove different than just viewing the images online. But for me, there's this added component that I've noticed over time, because it takes time. The phenomenon that I've noticed requires time as one of its key ingredients, that I will have seen a deck, say, early on in my tarot journey, years ago, and so on. Or I will have been, this happens also with certain famous artists, with certain books, literary or poetic genres, things like that, where I'll have seen something, you know, early on, and either think literally, oh, that's not my thing, or kind of just not register it. Sometimes I wonder if this is because certain things, I have this very intense response to my own interests. So sometimes when something's like seemingly going to be really spot on for me, it can be entirely overwhelming, such that I will initially like not even be able to see it. And I've noticed this partly because through journaling and various other things, sometimes I will discover something, whether that's a discipline, an area of study, an author, an artist, a tarot deck, wherein I go, oh my goodness, where have you been all my life? That's so fascinating as far as I can tell, prior to working with it or reading it or whatever. Oh my goodness, this new thing, yay. And then I will discover that I journaled about it 5 years ago, and I have in fact encountered it before. But, or I will discover that I have, you know, a book on my shelf that has an article by said author, or whatever else. But I've also therefore noticed that this often shows up in such a way that clearly I was like, oh my god, that's so cool, and then like my brain shuts it off because it's like, nope, can't process that yet. I suspect something like that has happened with the Crystal Tarot. Now, I don't know a whole lot about what slot this deck occupies in the overall body of work that we have that are the current like tarot deck industry, the perception around these decks. I don't know a whole lot about the artist. What I did read online was as follows, and this in particular, in addition to obviously loving what I saw of the imagery, is really what grabbed me. So it discusses the fact that there's a lot of inspiration derived from Gustav Klimt. You know, obviously we have, you know, the turn of the century Art Nouveau kind of influences. It says here, Klimt tried to describe the intentions of his work and its symbolic language. He spoke of, quote, the suffering of the human race and the external and inner forces which move man to fight for happiness. The desire for happiness finds solace in poetry. The arts leads us to the ideal realm where we can find absolute peace, absolute love, joy, that wonderful divine spark, this kiss to the entire world. I have a few opinions on absolutes or ideals, but aside from that, that's lovely. I especially like the emphasis on poetry. So it says, the Crystal Tarot shares this viewpoint that is so in tune with the nature of tarots. Together with a will, the cartomancy capable of understanding and directing the latent force of their symbols, they permit creating a connection with the emotional tensions, existential states, and intangible realities which make up the inner being of every individual. It then goes on to say, the softness of the drawing is immediately obvious in the archetypal figures painted by Elisabetta Trevisan. Approaching and accepting the symbolism of this deck is truly impossible without recognizing the influence of the Liberty style. Before providing allegorical elements, the drawings of the Crystal Tarot offer an atmosphere, a sequence of sensations which are communicated to the readers through observation of each card. The arcana seem to travel in a cocoon-like peaceful universe without loud noises or sudden movements, where each figure is permeated by extreme gentleness, comprehension, and consuming melancholy. The image is like poetry in this deck. To use and interpret it, we must trust our inner poetry. So a couple of things about that. That is possibly the most me thing I've almost ever heard. Almost. First of all, indicating the sensory experience of art and the way that communicates meaning, especially to the inner core of a given individual, is something that like informs my entire life and is very much how I understand most things anyway. Arguably, that's what we would call visual processing. As I think is really clear on this channel, I have a very intense interest, not only in writing poetry and using that as a kind of an archetypal exploration of many things, both external and internal, but I like to combine it with visuals in a very sort of, I suppose you could say, impressionistic way, but very much informed by art historical time periods. So, you know, if we say impressions in terms of impressionistic in terms of literal impressions, I think you could describe most of my poetry as visual vignettes, just in words. And therefore, the way I like to combine and think about them using music and image or moving image is all, as far as I'm concerned, part of the same endeavor. And tarot helps me explore that as well, the archetypes of tarot, but also the visuals of tarot. And as I think I've indicated it before on this channel, a lot of that, plus the information in art history, social history, archiving, historical artifacts, all that kind of thing, rare books librarianship, all of that is what informs my particular manner and method for reading the tarot more generally. So therefore, I also really appreciate that the baseline information about this deck makes very clear that the deck is functioning within a specific set of art historical associations, that you are free to make further associations, but that one must at least start by having an awareness of that, and I appreciate that. Okay. I also really like that it mentions, you know, quiet spaces, no loud noises or sudden movements from the autistic perspective, and I think made clear in my exploration of, for example, the Pagan Otherworlds tarot. I really enjoy what to me seem very autism-friendly outlooks and worldviews. As a, I wouldn't call myself sensory seeking in certain ways, and one of the ways in which I'm definitely sensory avoidant is my brain just needs a certain level of quiet in order to function and rebuild and draw inspiration. Okay, so this whole unboxing thing is really, really strange because of course I just sort of want to sit and stare at it. So the deck is produced by Lo Scarabeo. It says on the back, 22 major arcana and 56 minor arcana with divinatory instructions. In delicate forms realized in tempera and pastels, they recall infinite emotions through mystical messages like inalterable crystals of pure beauty. Okay, you can already tell I really like that. Okay, looks like we have one of those little bands on the plastic. That means I don't need the scissors for it. There we go. Like a pack of gum. So just to be clear, this is not a walkthrough, and even in terms of the unboxing, this is definitely not there for a review or really any kind of essentially, we can assume no lasting actual element of commentary here in this video based on first impressions and opening the deck. You know, I know that there are various things that people consider pet peeves about this sort of thing. So just, you know, placing the caveat that this is literally just me sort of waffling on in front of the camera as I open the deck. The first thing I will notice, I'm not going to cover the little white book either, by the way, because I've had a quick glance at it now, and it's just your standard little multilingual little white book. And contains basically the information I've already read from the shop listing on the cards. The first thing I will notice is I'm a little disappointed in the backs of the cards because the listing from which I purchased this sort of implied that the backs were those sort of blue and white peacock designs. You know, I'm not heartbroken about it, but I was looking forward to looking at those. So the next thing I'll mention is that the cardstock here is really quite plasticky. I'm shocked that it can bend so well like this in addition to like this. This is not, doesn't feel very nice, so I'm a little disappointed about that, but the deck is, you know, an okay thickness, I suppose. And we have the publication card here, which I do like the look of. So fighting the immediate urge, as I always do, to shuffle the deck straight away, especially with a deck like this where I'm not too impressed by the cardstock. It's your typical Lo Scarabeo, huge borders kind of situation, which I'm a little shocked made this particular deck so small, but I kind of knew going in that there was the situation where the borders would be like that with the you know, intense reliance on added labels, and also that there was this oval shape behind the cards that they seem to have felt the need to make room for, potentially. Not exactly my favorite, but I therefore was thinking, you know, especially depending on the cardstock, this may be a good candidate for a trim job at some point, and I'm fine with that. Mass market deck and all. Okay, so we have the Fool, which really actually communicates almost like a form of dance. It almost feels like this person isn't just taking that step off the cliff or jumping off the cliff or taking their first step into oblivion. It actually feels like they might be in the act of like capering or twirling, which I really like. There's definitely a much more distinctive celebratory nature to this. And I really like the stylization of the trees around it, which is something that in particular I think is a recurring motif, or seems to be anyway, in this deck. A very sort of strolling, like laughingly dancing your way out of the Garden of Eden, perhaps, if we were to use like more overtly Christian imagery, but something along those lines, which I do appreciate about this. I'm not going to give a commentary on every card. I'm just going to sort of react as I go. I do wish today, it's lashing rain out today in Ireland, as I think I mentioned earlier, and I do wish it was a little brighter in here. I may be able to turn on a lamp or so, but that'll give me a very yellow light, which I don't appreciate either. I'll give that a go. Okay, so slightly better lighting arrangement. One of the reasons I wanted this deck also was for this element of slightly Renaissance and late medieval, but mostly Renaissance and historical informed or inspired fashion inspiration, fashion content. You know, one of the things I'm definitely planning to do a lot more of this year, not that I already don't or anything like that, but really emphasize are my own fashion choices, my own way of sewing and making my own clothes. I think you'll be able to see here, this is a vintage belt buckle, but I just literally have sewn it to a linen strip for the purpose of making it, actually using it as a belt. Things like that. I really want to effectively MacGyver myself an entire world of clothing to exist in, and I'm finding that tarot, along with literally everything else about tarot, is a good inspiration for that. So looking out for beautiful, interesting clothing details in decks is something I'm kind of always on the lookout for, in fairness. Okay, High Priestess. She was one of the reasons I actually decided to buy this deck, is that this intensely patterned stained glass effect and the serenity, but also the determined look in her face fascinates me, absolutely fascinates me. And we have here a much more sort of Renaissance or perhaps even later Baroque look, meets 19th century, meets modern fantasy, which I do appreciate as well. We have silver birch in the background of the Empress card. These colors all just sort of talking and chatting with each other. And again, emphasis on those fruit trees. In terms of personal associations, I really like that this emperor is wearing a really starkly contrasted white and red with the large sort of green mound behind. This actually therefore strikes me as a very sort of like almost Irish mythological image, with white and red being those colors of otherworldly magic. And there's a sort of a sunset or sunrise behind the hill. All of that actually really appeals to me and brings into the foreground this much more sort of mythological understanding that I could actually work with the emperor, which weirdly enough hadn't occurred to me yet. This recurring motif of the birch trees in the background, there's obviously Art Nouveau stained glass work, some of which is in the Met. I'll put the name of it on screen because I can't think of it right now. That this reminds me of, there was also a painting in the Crawford Art Gallery at least a year or so ago that featured a lot of corvids and things in the background, but that was like a wide panorama style featuring this kind of tree silhouette against a further back kind of landscape in a river setting. So I really like that kind of artistic language being used. Okay, moving on a bit through some of these cards. So Justice is card 8 here. Really interesting comment about her clothing, actually, is we have an interesting amalgamation of what could be termed, say, 17th century bodice structure a little bit there, and possibly also sleeve shape, but in a way that also to me, especially given her, the way her hair is kind of built up with a headdress and so on, this looks very sort of like 1830s verging into the 1840s to me as well. And I personally find it really interesting when the timelessness of a, quote-unquote, timelessness of an image is actually achieved through subtle hints of clothing and the way in which that silhouette or the sense of structure could said to kind of echo throughout different time periods is something I pursue all the time with my own clothing, actually. The facial expression of this strength card fascinates me. Absolutely fascinates me. She looks almost wary, protective perhaps, but like, and the position of her hands. The bodily shapes in this deck would seem to be really stiff in certain ways, but also therefore very flexible, very dexterous, highly stylized, but there's just a sense of movement in this deck through otherwise quite static images that really fascinates me. I'm a little surprised to realize I hadn't looked through at the death card prior to purchasing this, but what's really fascinating about this is this creates almost the impression that death is not coming for you today, but that you can see death riding past, larger, mythologically large as it were, like giant in shape and structure, passing over the hills along with the shapes of the clouds. You see death coming for someone else or going for someone else off in the distance. Again, really taps into the same sort of thing I was thinking about with the Pagan Otherworlds tarot. This sort of like regarding from afar, encountering, not necessarily speaking or communicating though, and that's really fascinating. This Devil card is mesmerizing. I don't know what to think of it yet though. I'll have to spend a lot of time with this one. I think it's beautiful and exquisite and calm and peaceful, and I'll have to really, really take a look at this one. Again, there's a very Eden-like quality rather than, at least in terms of first impressions, overt, you know, ideas around toxic cycles and so on. This Tower card. The Tower card in general is one of my favorite cards in tarot of all time, just straight up. And this tower card in particular looks like the sort of illustrations that would have been in books of mine as a child. And that's part of the reason I decided to get this deck, is that it really reminded me of the sort of intense coloration and sort of patchwork, historically informed patchwork, geometric designs, especially in landscapes that I would have had as in books as a child. And for me, that is very, very relevant to the deconstruction of the tower. So upon seeing this, this card in particular, I was like, okay, well, if the commentary on poetry and art history and quiet inner landscapes and so on wasn't enough to sell me on the deck, that Tower card was sealed the deal. The moon is just mesmerizing, beautiful. That's all I really have to say about it at the moment. That looks like a dream. I love me some suns with faces. I know all the sun cards have faces and so on, but like, I can never get enough of a sun with a face in it, or a moon with a face in it. Those kind of like extra wide smiles and things just really are amazing. And the world with this gorgeous, like strong power pose, almost stretching as if ready to go out and be. So the rest of the deck, as is generally these days my preference. I have an idea for a video coming about, you know, how I talk about or how I pursue what I keep thinking of as like in-betweeny systems. So things that are pip decks but not necessarily Marseille, things that are not necessarily RWS, things that go off and do absolutely and totally their own thing. All of that sort of stuff is something that I would like to maybe try to address like with some actual attention to detail and so on in a dedicated video. But part of the reason again that this deck appealed to me is that it's a pip deck, but it's not necessarily functioning out of any particular established tradition. At least as far as I know anyway. So I think it's possible, just sort of quickly scanning through here, that you know, a person could interpret these as, especially the 9 and 10 of cups, as being almost I suppose like a lazy approach, but to be honest, in a deck that is so jam-packed with detail and so much bright and effectively, you know, really almost extravagant color, for me that's kind of a relief. I think it helps balance out the entire structure anyway. But that's just my opinion, and often my approach to things like pip decks, is they're how I help manage the often really, really potent overstimulation of the art or art historical content in a deck, the visual content of a deck. We have here the Ace of Cups with that beautiful butterfly at the top, absolutely gorgeous, and with the Two of Cups, a sort of sun and moon, and the circle behind, so there's this cyclical but also somewhat dualistic thing going on there that I really appreciate. This Three of Cups has a really fascinating egg shape in the center, which my brain immediately wants to do all sorts of really intense personal gnosis, goddessy, embryonic stuff with, so that is cool. Especially because, again, it has sort of an off-white or cream color and red in it, separated into components. Oh, my brain wants to do all sorts of things with that, and I'm very excited about that card. And let's see. Five of Cups, we have a sort of a pentagram shape. 5-pointed star, which I find really lovely. We don't have anything. 6 of Cups. I'm finding, especially with pip decks where, you know, you have an arrangement of cups on the card or whatever, I tend to get really interested in the geometric implications and associations that the shapes of the suit symbols make. So there's this really interesting sort of, for example, reciprocity or mirror image that's happening here in this 6 of Cups. In a way that, you know, in some ways feels quite destabilizing to look at, except that, you know, I do read with reversals, for example, so that then brings in a really interesting implication around how one interprets reversals. Or, for example, also here with the 7 of Cups, the arrangement of the 4 cups at the bottom, you know, normally you might think 4 cups facing upward, 3 more forming a triangle. That creates an almost architectural structure with a very solid base in a pip deck. This card has done none of those things. And that's really interesting to me. Really fascinating also in terms of how color combined with things like geometry and negative space is expressed in this deck. There's a lot that I kind of want to think about and explore. And I'm noticing as I look at these cards that the, for example, we'll have to see if this recurs throughout the other suits. But for example, the 6 and 8 of Cups have a reproduced background that visually would relate the 2 cards in some way. So the actual shapes and colors of the backgrounds are the same. And then for the 7, 9, and 10, the background is also reproduced. It's hard to tell at the moment if it is exactly identical, but it appears to be so anyway. So these all have the same exact blue and green floral plant design behind the cups, which is interesting. Initially I thought maybe it was, you know, the 6, 8, and 10 would be the same or something, but it doesn't appear to be the case. So we'll see what the rest of the suits say about that. I really love this Page of Cups. How fascinating, how lovely. Really, really nice. Reminds me actually a little bit of a figure that I drew myself, which I put a little mini image of on the screen. It's almost interesting to kind of meet characters that you feel you've drawn elsewhere in your decks. Although my image was an exploration of the Arcanum number 2, so effectively in some systems, the High Priestess. This Knight of Cups is absolutely stunning. And striding off into the landscape. So there's this, again, this use of space and depth through texture, but also through framing devices and arrangement on the card. I love the robes of the King of Cups. Almost to me in the back here look serpentine, which is really fascinating. Okay, so we're into the Pentacles. You have here the Ace of Pentacles. Really beautiful coloration there. Lots of really interesting subtle mixes of brown and purple with that kind of green. 2 of Pentacles. Really gorgeous. And here I'm noticing, for example, with the 3 of Pentacles, there's a very distinct separation between, for example, above and below ground, with it looks like a little bit of a shadow association perhaps, or like a, could we interpret this as a physical body in some ways? Oh, I have a lot of ideas about this one. 5-pointed star. 6-pointed star. Beautiful. A 5-pointed star recurring in the 8. That's really interesting. And again, we have certain recurring backgrounds, it would seem, or at least recurring motifs in the backgrounds. Well, I don't know if the structure allows for an exact replica. Yeah, we have the 5 and the 8 have a similar background. And then there's a splitting of the background in, for example, the 7, 9, and 10. So there is a repeated structure here, numerically speaking, as the blossom grows. And a repetition of the 6-pointed star in the 10 of Pentacles. Very interesting. Oh, so it's knave, knight, queen, and king as well, rather than page. Wow. Look at those almost wintry trees. How fascinating from a seasonal perspective. Very medieval. I like that a lot. Queen of Pentacles is glamorous. Look at that face. Power pose. Ooh, the King of Pentacles seems like much more like your traditional Emperor card. Okay, Wands. I'm going to speed this up a little bit for myself here. Okay, so we do have recurring things again with the 7 and 8. It looks like the recurring patterns in the backs of the cards, the backgrounds, might be slightly different for this suit. It's difficult to tell. It's a lot, the colors are, the contrast between the colors is doing interesting things to my head, so I will have to explore that further. And we have here the Knave of Wands, which I really like, with her long bow, the sort of twining trees behind. Again, a very sort of orchard aesthetic, and having had recent experiences, spiritual experiences in apple orchards myself in the last couple of years, especially orchards to which I cannot return. Knight of Wands. She looks like a lightning bolt. I love her. So cool. Queen of Wands is done with your shit. I love it. Oh, look at that floor. Oh my goodness, and the birch trees. King of Wands almost looks like he's surrounded by little fairy lights, which is really kind of nice. Okay, and we're in the swords suit now. We have a really interesting recurring motif of crescent moons in the Ace of Swords, pointing downwards too, towards water and various ocean life. I like that a lot. Ooh, the Two of Swords. Look, there's a much more sort of up, down, as above, so below, but the crack forming between the two. Okay, so I'm wondering if the suit symbols are a little bit switched, although I don't think so. We have water here with the Three of Swords, which I think is really fascinating with this fish, which to me is registering as a salmon, just because I'm doing mythological things with that in my head right now. Okay, so we have a recurring motif of a little sort of lobster between what looks like a very Thoth-inspired shaping in the swords for the 6 and the 9. And we also have recurring crescent moon shapes for the swords for card the 4 of Swords, the 8 of Swords, and the 10 of Swords. So I'll have to see if that's more consistent across the different suits, the different kinds of ways in which these things recur. Oh my goodness, this Knave of Swords on that gigantic, psychedelic chessboard. Oh, wow. How medieval. Oh, that's so cool. This strikes me as almost alchemical, you know, this like almost flaming molten light coming out of the shield while striding with that kind of melancholic confidence through water. This Queen of Swords, the Queen of Swords being one of my it can make or break a deck kind of situations, absolutely is also what made me purchase this deck. She reminds me of very specific, I mean, it's obvious, Renaissance, especially wedding portraiture, which carries a very big association for me in terms of my own personal childhood and things. A lot of the art historical information and sort of just familial information that I was exposed to as a kid would have involved exposure to historical wedding portraits. The situation, like even my aunt when she got married had kind of created as part of their invitation her and her fiance facing each other in that kind of like pair of wedding portraits commissioned for a marriage or a wedding kind of way, and that slotted in perfectly to exactly what our family has a tendency to do with things. So I just really, really like this personal association, and I love this type of Renaissance clothing, the sort of pleated skirt portion of a sleeveless kirtle, like waist seam sleeveless kirtle, is really, really beautiful, just absolutely gorgeous. And with this huge crescent moon and the water in the background, and absolutely, like, she herself is so fiery in color, but there is still that like absolute ice queen, I will destroy your soul or I will make it. I will make you or I will break you kind of power and sense of control in there. Like that capacity is there. But it's kept in check, it's kept in balance, it's given its element of flow. It's absolutely stunning. I really, really like it. And I like the sensitivity, almost, except for his face, of the King of Swords, and the presence of, again, what appears to me to be the salmon. So there you have it. That is the entire deck. I'm going to give it a quick shuffle now and see how we do. Again, it feels very plasticky, but it might actually just mean that I can sort of trim it if I want, or bring it around with me places with not worrying about being too precious about it. It's a good size for my hands. I wouldn't mind it being a mini deck. I just realized I shuffled it with the faces facing me rather than the backs facing me. It's a habit I tend to have, so we'll see how it shuffles the normal way. Yeah. Delightful. So, you know, in fairness to the plasticky cardstock, it makes for a really nice, very, very easy, very standard mass market shuffling experience. So I won't do any kind of official reading, but I will just sort of have a look at whatever card comes up. Ooh, I like the weight of these cards as well. And it's not sticking to itself or anything like that, so I do like all of that. I'll get my head wrapped around the backs. Okay, let's take a look. Ooh! We have Death reversed. Oh.
Hi guys, editing Sorsha coming to you here just quickly to say that I noticed something in working on this video and taking another look at these cards, is as I was talking about with the borders here, excuse the voice, it's really early in the morning. As I was talking about the borders here, we have this oval shape behind, and then obviously there's a blank space between the continuation of the image here on each card, and then obviously all those like really big, unnecessary old school Lo Scarabeo titles. And I was thinking, like, how odd that the image actually continues in that little added bar at the top and the bottom. And then I was glancing at the guidebook, and on the front of the guidebook, as well as on the back with another card, it actually has what obviously the original complete image looked like, where the white space and then the continuation of the image as a frame or border is all around the image. And I have to say, that's really kind of tragic to me that they did this instead. So I think this is almost definitely going to be a trim job for me. But that's like as I said before, that's fine. I think I almost wonder, I want to put the question out there. Do people know if there's like a nicer printing of this deck done, or if it's been reprinted at any point, or anything to do with that kind of formatting aspect and, like, I suppose you could call it editorial work? If you know, or if there is such a thing, let me know in the comments down below. I'd be really grateful to kind of hear what the variations are on that. So yeah, now I'll run the outro for the video. All right, bye.
All right, so yeah, I feel like I didn't end up really saying a whole lot in this, except just walking through the cards, sort of. But I have a lot of ideas for where I want the channel to go, at least for the foreseeable future. A whole bunch of projects kind of percolating away in my head. I may, for example, do a bit of a exploration of my books, a reorganization of that soon. So maybe a book tour as part of that, and an explanation kind of how I approach a lot of the material in the books that I have. I have ideas about deck systems, research projects around certain specific decks. Also some ideas about deck pairings and art process, glamour magic, a whole bunch of stuff that I'm kind of like allowing to kind of percolate, and that I will obviously address and make videos about as and when it feels ready. So I hope everyone had a lovely holiday, New Year experience, and so on. and that you're all taking care of yourselves to the best of your ability and being kind. And I will see you all next time. Bye. Okay, that's where that's coming from. Oh no. No, 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 no.